Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's session on screening platform and biomarkers for prediction and prevention of diseases and unmet public health need. Today's session is going to be presented by my colleague Colm. We also have on the line my legal colleagues Desmond and Domenico. But before we start the session, I just wanted to remind you that all the sessions, including this one, are being recorded, and the slides, as well as the recordings, will be published on the IHI website, as well as on this platform. If you have any questions for us, please use the chat function on the top right corner of the screen to ask any questions. So thank you very much for joining. I'm now giving the floor to my colleague, Colm. Colm, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rui, and I'd also like to welcome everyone to the webinar. Second, let's get the next slide. Okay, so on today's webinar, I'm hoping to cover three main items. Firstly, a little bit of an introduction to the IHI program, so that you get an understanding of what we do, and this is important for you when you're putting a proposal together. Secondly, obviously we'll discuss the topic at hand, the screening platform topic. And then finally, towards the end of the webinar, I hope to give you some tips on how to, first of all, find consortium partners, which are crucial for all IHI projects, and tips also on how to put together a good quality proposal to maximize your chances of being selected for funding. I should note that there are certain things I'm not going to cover in this webinar, in particular anything on rules and procedures or on the budgets for IHI projects. And that is because we have already had webinars on these earlier this week, and the recordings are available at the link there. Okay, so I'll start with a little bit on IHI, and I'm guessing a lot of you on this webinar are already familiar with who we are and what we do, but just to make sure that everyone is on the same level, I'll cover what we do very, very briefly. So I'll start by saying that we are basically a funding agency, and we fund collaborative projects in healthcare across Europe. But perhaps our unique point is that we are a public-private partnership. And not just us in the office are a public-private partnership, but every single project that we support are also public-private partnerships. And what this means is that we provide funding from the European Commission for half of the activities on the project. And these big healthcare industry associations or their partners provide resources for the other half of the project. And it is by combining forces between these big industry players and organizations funded by European Commission funding that we think we can address some of the big challenges in healthcare that could not be addressed otherwise. So you'll see the names of these industry associations on the screen. It's important you know who they are. They should be partners in your project, and they cover COSIR, for example, medical imaging, radiotherapy, health IT, and so on. We've got FPN Vaccines Europe covering pharmaceuticals and vaccines, Europa Bio covering the biotech industry, and then MedTech Europe also working on medical technologies. On the next slide, I go through our general objectives, and this is for you to get a picture of what we do, and this should filter down to every single one of our projects. So as you're putting your proposal together, you should bear these in mind, addressing the call text, of course. First of all, there's a major focus under IHI on the end result of the project, the beneficiaries of the end result of the project, and those should be patients. The idea behind what we do is to take the latest research, latest innovation, and put it in a position where it can be translated through to benefiting patients. And I think this is crucial that you understand this. We're not funding just nice research projects. These projects have to have this ultimate benefit towards patients, and it has to be clear even if it doesn't happen within the project, it has to be clear how this will happen afterwards. And the second bullet here, a bit more detail on the fact that we now, those of you who are familiar with our previous iteration under IMI, Innovative Medicines Initiative, should recognize now that we're beyond just medicines, we're covering the entire spectrum of care, the entire ecosystem, and we're going all the way from prevention all the way to diagnosis and treatment. And you can already see that this topic is perhaps focused more on the prevention side. It's also important to recognize that we're focused on areas of unmet public health need. And what that means is that we don't want to address things that are already well addressed. So it's areas where there is a gap, further research is needed, and there are people who will benefit from that research. And just to say that, the idea behind us, as already mentioned, is that we fund cross-sectoral collaboration between all these industry sectors and publicly funded organizations. One of our objectives is, as a public-private partnership, to make these industries also globally competitive. I'll stop quickly on our funding model because I think this is also important in the context of a public-private partnership. And I've already mentioned this, but just to reiterate it, that our projects are co-funded by cash contributions from the EU going to what we call the public beneficiaries, and these are typically universities or hospitals, small and medium-sized enterprises, and so on. And each project must have more or less half of the funding coming from private members or contributing partners. And these are usually the big industry partners who bring their own resources to a project. So these are typically researchers working alongside the researchers in universities, etc., funded by EU cash contributions. I'm going to come back to this in my presentation because this is a crucial point that you need to understand. Every project has to have approximately 50%, at least 45%, but we aim for 50% funding coming from contributions from partners in the project. And then one last slide before I get on to the topic itself. And this is just so you understand how our proposal submission and evaluation process works. So this topic is under a single stage procedure. And what that means is that now that the call is launched, and I hope you've seen that, the call is launched and you can submit proposals. What we expect to happen now is for people like you to join forces in a collaboration. And you can see a typical collaboration on the screen here. Write your proposal and submit it to us. And I've highlighted in this section here that these collaborations, these consortia, should consist of both publicly funded partners and partners bringing their own resources, here labeled as private partners and contributing partners. So once all the proposals are submitted to us, we then invite external experts to evaluate the proposals against some fixed criteria. And then the ones that are judged the best will go through to the next stage, which is funding. So you have to understand that it's a competitive evaluation. We're expecting multiple proposals to be submitted. And therefore, it's your job to make sure that you are on the most credible proposal. You have the best partners and you spend time putting together a credible proposal that addresses the needs of the call text, and that will be evaluated highly by our panel of experts. And towards the end of this webinar, I'll come on to a few tips on how to ensure that you will be evaluated well. Okay, so on to the topic itself. And as Rui said, this topic is about developing a screening platform and biomarkers for the prediction and prevention of diseases of unmet public health need. Before I go into detail on this, just to say that this presentation is based on the call text, which is on our website, and it's in the platform. You should refer to that. That is the document, the reference document, which you should always go to when you're putting your proposal together. I'm going to present kind of a highlights of this call text, but the call text is a document you need to view and read carefully to ensure you have a good chance of being successful in the evaluation. So first of all, what is the challenge that we are trying to address? I think we probably already all know this, but the burden of disease in Europe, not just in Europe, but we focus on Europe, is rising. Populations are getting older, of course, and this can be challenging to the healthcare systems in Europe in regards of funding and sustainability. We also know that if we could identify those people who have a predisposition to becoming ill or getting a disease before that actually happens, we could then intervene earlier, perhaps preventing disease early, perhaps postponing it, or perhaps making it milder. And this, of course, then could make it obviously better for the patients. Their quality of life would be improved, but also reduce some of the burden on the healthcare systems. And at the moment, one of the issues we have is that we don't have a full understanding of many of the mechanisms of the diseases, even those that are quite common and have been studied for a long time. And I guess also perhaps we don't have the way of implementing these screening platforms for this project in this topic in particular. Some of these mechanisms in place to monitor, to identify people are not there yet. And that's probably the aim of this topic in kind of a global way. So I just one slide on the type of expertise that we think would be needed to address this. And I think if you think broadly and you think about us as a public-private partnership, you should already be thinking about along the lines of this. But crucially, if we really want to have an impact on patients, we need their input into a project. They need to say what will work for them and what won't. And of course, we're expecting healthcare professionals to implement the results of these projects eventually, and therefore their input is needed as well. What will fit into their workflows, what won't, what will they need, what don't they need, and so on. So like a lot of IHI topics, it's a major focus on patients and healthcare professionals, so we can be sure the results meet have the impact that we would want. And then obviously specifically for this topic, we're expecting a lot of biomarker work to be done. So people who've got a lot of interest, experience in biomarkers. A lot of data will be generated, and obviously the analytics around this data will have to be done well. So people who are used to working with biomarker data, doing AI algorithms on top of them. And we expect these expertise to come from a variety of stakeholders. Again, recognizing that we are a public-private partnership, and we like to make sure that all the actors that are needed to meet the objectives of the topic are there. So academic researchers, small and medium-sized enterprises, the pharma companies, the medtech companies, and maybe you could also think about HTA regulators, if necessary, for your particular proposal to make sure that you are going to achieve the impacts that we expect. So the next two slides, I've kind of summarized the scope of the topic. The first thing we want is obviously to develop or maybe further develop an existing screening platform and generate the evidence base for general population screening for an identified disease. And it is up to you as applicants to identify the disease or diseases. And they should be, of course, of unmet public health need. And we also want you in your application to specify the initial biomarkers or biomarker combinations that you plan to use to identify the people at risk. And this does not mean that you must use those. I mean, if one turns out later on not to be very useful, we're not going to pin you down to make sure you do that, but just to give credibility to your proposal and make sure that you can start with something relatively quickly. We want you to put this in your proposal. And at the end of the day, with again the focus on impact, the biomarkers and screening platforms should be clinically validated, so that we can be confident that they can be taken up by the healthcare systems and have the impact we want. So alongside the platform and biomarkers, we also expect assays, digital tools, etc., to be developed in the project. Again, as I hope you've gathered already, a big emphasis on impact, but to achieve that, we think clinical practice guidelines may need to be changed or developed based on what you're doing in the project. And then, of course, similarly to provide education to those end users, both the clinicians and the patients themselves or their families, so that they will take up the results of the project as well. So the expected outcomes, and just to say that outcomes are kind of medium-term effects based on the results of the project. The next slide's on impacts, which are longer term, but these are the medium term. So these are not necessarily developed in the project, but they're coming shortly afterwards. And you should focus your results on achieving these so that these can be achieved relatively soon after the project ends. So of course, we want patients to receive interventions at the right time. So hopefully that the disease can be prevented or at least delayed. And to do so, of course, then the physician should have a platform that they can use to identify those patients, those individuals, with suitable biomarkers on the platform, and also then be able to select the best preventative action for their particular the patient in front of them. We also want researchers to be able to build on what is developed in the project so that in the future we can get better interventions. So it's important that you understand that we obviously want the impact on the patients as much as possible, but we also have a longer term impact which is done through further research, and you should be able to facilitate that. And of course, then focusing on healthcare systems, again, they will want to ensure that they're targeting their resources in the best area, so to those interventions and to those patients who will benefit most. And so impacts are longer term than outcomes. So these are probably, if you take the results of the project, extra work will need to be done to make sure these impacts happen. But again, you need to think about this in your proposal so that you are sure you are addressing these and you're demonstrating how these could be achieved, even if that extra bit of work will not happen within your project itself. So I kind of mentioned this already, but facilitating the development of these cost-effective interventions. So in other words, making sure that those organizations who need to take on the results to develop new interventions are able to do so. And again, then the patient should benefit from these new interventions. Further biomarkers could be developed based on the knowledge coming out of the project, which would then ultimately also benefit patients. And of course, we want new AIs, new AI systems, maybe new AI techniques or just new AI algorithms to allow for proper personalized health, which is what we all want, of course, and increase the availability of these personalized health interventions to the end users, be they the physicians or the patients themselves. There are a few other considerations which you will see in the topic text when you go to look at it. One of them is, and this is if relevant for your project, is to seek early engagement with regulators, regulatory authorities. And this is to make sure, again, focusing on impact, that there's a pathway through for the results of your project. If they need to go through a regulatory process, they can do so that we benefit the patients at the end. I've already mentioned the impact on healthcare systems, but we've specifically asked that in this project, you demonstrate that the outputs can be taken up by healthcare systems, so it's important you address that. And also, we know this project is not working in isolation. We know there's a lot of other initiatives out there in a similar space. You should be aware of those, and we want to make sure that, if relevant, you have the resources and the capacity available to interact with them, to make sure that you synergize and we're not doing the same thing, and if you can share information with each other to improve both your projects, you can do so. So I've got a specific slide on dissemination, exploitation, and communication. And the reason for this is that in the IHI office, we think that these elements are crucial to ensure that the project achieves what we want it to achieve. And I guess before I go through the bullet points here, I want you to understand that IHI projects are not standalone research projects that have a beginning and an end. They should be viewed as more of a catalyst to the ultimate impacts. So you're kind of starting up something, but what comes after is sometimes even more important than what you do in the project. And I think you should go into an IHI project with that understanding. And to achieve the impacts we want, you need to think about who the next actors are and what they would need to carry out the further work. They would first of all need to know what your results are. If your results are suitable for them to carry out further work, they need to know what they are. And they need to be able to take them up. And the results themselves perhaps need to be funded. The further work needs to be funded. And therefore, we would ask you to reserve budget for an effective dissemination and communication so that the end users or the further users of the results know what they are. And also think about an early business plan. And the idea behind this is that if further work is needed, who is going to fund it? And you should already start thinking about this at a very early stage in the project to ensure the sustainability of your results. And in particular for this topic, we ask you to, in a topic text, you see we've asked applicants to publish and promote some of the outputs, methods, SOPs, algorithms, standards, guidelines, and so on. And there's also a thing called the 3A's, which applies for this particular topic. And that is that products and services developed based on clinical studies must be made affordable, available, and accessible at the end of the project. So I'm getting towards the end of the topic-specific slides, but just a little bit on budget, and some people ask about the duration as well, so I'll go into that. First of all, for this topic, there's a total of 30 million euros of public funding available, and I'm emphasizing this is public funding. And we expect to fund projects requesting 10 to 15 million euros of public funding each, so funding between 2 and 3 projects essentially. And I'll reiterate again that for you to be eligible to go through the evaluation process, you must have at least 45% of the total budget of the project coming from IHI private members of contributing partners. So for example, if you're applying for 10 million of public funding, your total project budget should be around, I think it's just over 18 million. And that would mean that the 45% is the extra 8 million, 8.2 million comes from private partners. I should say, however, that we are a match funding model. So the expectation is 50-50, 50% public, 50% private. Our eligibility criterion is slightly less, but that's to allow for any unexpected events that happen during your submission process or during the project lifetime itself. So I would aim for 50%. On duration, we leave the duration up to you. So you should choose a duration which suits the objectives of your specific proposal and justify it so the evaluators understand your choice. If you're unsure, perhaps you could go and look at some existing IMI projects and see how long they've taken, or other similar projects funded perhaps under Horizon 2020 or Horizon Europe. Okay, I know I said at the start I'm not going to go into questions of budget, but in past webinars we have had a lot of questions on that. So I'm going to give a very simple example just to explain 1 or 2 elements of how the budgets work. For any further questions, I will refer you to the webinar that took place earlier this week. So what I've done here is I've kind of split the budget into costs and funding. Costs under blue, funding under this kind of pink color. And I've split the participants into what we call the public partners, those receiving funding from us, and then private members and contributing partners, those bringing their own resources to the project. And I want to emphasize under public partners, you will see that there are SMEs, which are obviously private companies. They are eligible for funding, and indeed, more or less everyone is eligible for funding. The expectation is that SMEs would receive our funding as well. There's nothing to prevent an SME becoming a contributing partner. But just bear that in mind. SMEs are expected to receive funding, and some of the bigger partners will bring their own resources. And you've also see here that I've divided the total cost of this particular example project is 20 million. And I've divided the cost between the public partners and the private partners in a 50-50 split. And therefore the public partners are receiving 10 million. The contributing partners and private members are bringing 10 million. And we have this 50-50 split. This budget here would be eligible to go through to the evaluation. There's a lot of other models involved here, and as I said, go to the webinar on budgets to understand them a bit better. Okay, and now come on to the third and final part of the webinar, the presentation, and this is how to submit a proposal, a little bit about evaluation, and towards the end I'll also talk about finding consortium partners. So I said at the start that the submission tool is open for submissions. This is the Horizon Europe Funding and Tenders portal. And I would recommend you go there straight away and start your submission. And the reason for that is that you can therefore then download all the templates that you need to put together a proposal. So these templates are divided into several different types. There's part A, which is actually web forms. You fill in forms, and it is mostly administrative data, but crucially important, there is also researcher data. And the evaluators in the evaluation will use this to assess your proposal. So it's worthwhile spending a bit of time on showcasing your expertise in this section. But the bulk of your proposal will actually be in part B, which is the narrative part, and it is based on a Word document, and there is a template available. You will see that when you open a template, you will see it is based on three main sections: excellence, impact, and implementation. There is a lot of guidance in this template, and our high recommendation to you is to read this guidance, read the instructions very carefully. This guidance has been well thought out. It is to help you write a proposal which meets the expectations of the evaluators during the evaluation. There are also several annexes, some of which are mandatory and some of which are not, so it's important to recognize which. You will see them when you go in there. I won't spend time on them, but you need to fill in very briefly the participant type, some of the budget details. If you're going to run clinical studies, there's additional information on those requested in the clinical studies template. And there's a coordinator declaration to make sure that you have these contributing partners or private members bringing their own resources. Okay, I don't expect you to read the detail of this slides, which is why I've grayed out a lot of it. You should come back to these later after the webinar is over. But I want you to understand what tool the evaluation experts use to assess the quality of your proposal. And they have evaluation criteria, for which there are 3. And you will see that they exactly match the headings of the proposal template. That is, they're under excellence, impact, and on the next slide, I've got implementation. I want you to understand what our instructions to evaluators are. So what we do is we go through each of these criteria in turn. They're divided into sub-criteria, and we will ask specific questions to evaluators on these sub-criteria. For example, I would ask the evaluation experts to comment on the clarity and pertinence of the project's objectives. And then they would do so. And I would also ask them to what extent is this proposed work ambitious and goes beyond state of the art? And they will put a specific comment on that. And we'll do this for each of these sub-criteria and each of the points in the sub-criteria. So again, it's very important for you when you're formulating your proposal that you put yourself in the shoes of the evaluation experts and think about, is it clear? Are my objectives clear? Will the evaluators understand what my objectives are? Is it obvious that my work is ambitious and goes beyond the state of the art? Will the evaluators understand that? And likewise for all of these sub-criteria. I'll just emphasize again here that the guidance in the proposal template, make sure you address each of these points. So if you do follow that carefully, and put yourself in the shoes of the evaluators, you should do reasonably well. I won't dwell on this slide, just to say it's the implementation criterion. Okay, my last few slides are then on tips for applicants. And this is based on a long experience in IHI and IMI before. What sometimes applicants are not fully aware of and where they should put their emphasis. So I've said already that the topic text is what you should be referring to when you're applying to our calls. What I've presented here is kind of a summary of that. Please go to the topic text. That is the instructions we also give to the evaluators. You should recognize that putting together a credible consortium is crucial to being successful. You should start forming your consortium straight away if you've not already done so. When you do put your consortium together, think of the public-private partnership, and expand this beyond just an academic and an industry. Think about patients, think about healthcare professionals, think about regulatory experience. Crucially, think about those partners who bring those in-kind contributions. This is an eligibility criterion. If you do not meet that, you will not even be evaluated. So you must have that, at least 45% and ideally 50% funding. And the third bullet is essentially what I've said already. Put yourself in the shoes of the evaluators and make sure that you provide all the information that they would need to score your proposal highly. And we also in IHI really think that if the next step of our projects is to get some sort of regulatory opinion, then please engage with regulators early, or at least plan for that within your project. So how to find project partners? So obviously to apply, you need to build or join a consortium. The best way to do this is through this platform, B2Match platform, and join in the pitching sessions later today and meet other participants. There are other tools available, such as on the EU Funding and Tenders portal. There's a partner search tool for every single IHI topic. While I think the B2Match platform is probably the best approach, I think you should also put your details here so people can find you and search for others there as well. Each Horizon Europe associated country and EU member state also has a national contact point for IHI. They're called our States Representative Group, and their job is to help you be as successful as possible in our calls. And I know they would ask, they would invite you to reach out to them should you need any help. And finally, of course, networking your own networks, network on social media. You can network on the IHI social media. I think my top tip here is to be proactive. Don't wait for people to come to you, even if you've got long experience in this area. Reach out to other people. And with that, maybe reaching out to other people using the functionality in the platform is the best way to do so. So just very, very quickly on how to book a meeting. There's a step-to-step guide. You can see the link at the bottom there. But what you need to do is, first of all, under the meetings tab, you sign up for one-to-one meeting sessions. That allows people to contact you and for you to contact other people. Then under the participants tab, search for people who are filling the gaps in your consortium, request a meeting with them, add a little bit of detail and a message. Obviously spend a bit of time thinking about the message and send a request, and hopefully then you'll have a fruitful meeting. And just one word on this, we've heard when we ran this session for the first IHI calls, we heard this was quite successful. So I really would encourage you to take full advantage of this platform. And then later on this morning, we're going to have a pitching session where some organizations who are interested in this particular topic are going to showcase what they're going to bring to a consortium and also what they need other people to bring to their consortium. And I would highly recommend you come to this as well. And this is available through the platform. You can see there's a good number of organizations here. I won't dwell on these, the agenda is already in the platform. So I'm just going to finish and just re-emphasize some of my key points. Key point, find consortium partners. be proactive, start working now if you haven't already. And I should have also added, think about getting those in-kind contributions. And then on proposals, read the call text carefully. That is the reference document. Read it several times. Follow the guidance in the proposal template. This will make sure that you are addressing the needs of the evaluation experts. And as I said before, think of what comes after your project. Your project is not a standalone project. What comes after is sometimes even more important. And therefore, having funding to make sure that people are aware of your results, that they can be sustained and so on, is very important. So with that, I'll stop the webinar and we'll come on to answering the questions which have been submitted in the chat.
So thank you very much, Colm, for your presentation. We did receive a few questions via the chat. Thank you very much for everyone that contributed. And our first question is, are mental health conditions also included as target population in this call?
So perhaps before I answer any questions, I should just say kind of a general thing about how I'm going to answer these. So as I said, the call text is the document which you are addressing, and it's also the document the evaluators will use to assess the best, identify the best proposals. It's up to you to take the call text and interpret it and then convince the evaluators that what you're proposing addresses the needs in the call text and is also credible to achieve the impact we would want. So I cannot judge in advance what's good and what's not good. So I would say, in answer to the first question, which is, are mental health conditions included as a target population for this call? If you think that there's unmet medical health need in this area and you can put together a convincing consortium and proposal based on that, then please do so and please address what the evaluators would want. I would say nothing is excluded. There's no exclusions in this particular call text. But at the same time, I'm not going to say that definitely this is going to be successful.
Great. Thank you very much, Colm. And our next question is a clinical study trial expected in the proposal? What main deliverables are expected?
So again, this is kind of up to you. I think for several, I can envision several types of proposal here that would definitely need some clinical studies, and therefore I would guess probably most likely you would want clinical studies, and certainly the budget available should allow for that. It may be, again, I don't want to interpret the call text. It may, if you can find a way of proving to the evaluators that you can develop a screening platform and biomarkers without a study, you can go ahead and do so. On the deliverables, I would just refer you to the call text again.
Okay, and should the applicants focus exclusively on prevention, or can there be also an intervention study integrated in the proposal?
I'd have to refer to the exact text in the call, which I don't have in front of me now. Obviously, we want, I think there's a big focus on identifying people at risk. And I guess I'll just refer to the same answer I gave. If you go and refer to the call text and find the language there, and if what you are proposing would fit under that, it is then up to you to demonstrate to the evaluators that what you're proposing fits that bill. So I think obviously preventing would help. Maybe preventing progression could be included. You'd have to see the call text itself.
Okay, and do the biomarkers to be experienced in the screening need to be already clinically validated and approved, or validation can be completed during the project?
So I don't think we specified this in the call text, but I guess you've gathered from what I said that there's a major focus on impact. We want to make sure that the results of the project can, not necessarily within the project, but soon afterwards, they can have the impacts we expect. So we don't want to spend a lot of time on validating and researching new biomarkers. That's not to say that can't happen for some of them within the project, but the focus is very much on having something practical at the end that can be utilized. So I think you should demonstrate that your choice of biomarkers, be they validated or not, can have that impact. And I think that's up to you to then choose the biomarkers that are most suitable.
Okay, and this question also is related to biomarkers, which is biomarker qualification procedures for drug development, EMA or others. How important are they in this call?
So I think in this, there's a specific sentence in the topic text asking you to, if relevant, to engage with regulators. Again, we don't want to spend a huge amount of time focusing on, researching biomarkers and focusing too much on that. If it's necessary for what you're proposing, that's fine. But again, focus on the impacts, focus on what we want as the end result here, and that should guide what you're doing in terms of biomarker validation.
Okay, and the next question is, does this have to be screening for early detection or previously unknown disease? Or can the call also cover project-associated with screening of certain already identified diagnosed patient groups to detect subgroups that drives treatment selection?
So I'll answer this question in terms of unmet public health need. I think in the call text, we have asked applicants to identify an area of unmet public health need so that the project is focused. We haven't specified what that is. So it is up to you again to choose the area of interest to you, obviously, and demonstrate to the evaluators why this is important, that this your proposal should address that particular need. And therefore, I would say what you've suggested there, both could be in scope. If there is a particular subgroup where there's a high unmet public health need, you would probably be okay.
Great. Thank you very much, Colm. And this is actually a quite important question. So if the applicants still have any questions when drafting the proposal, can they reach out to someone at IHI, or how can they reach out to us?
So what I would say, if the questions are on kind of scope of the topic, it's best to go with what I've said. Take the call text, talk to your consortium. Between you, I hope you have the expertise to understand the call text well and put together a credible proposal. We cannot take interpretations of the call text. So if you ask us, is this in scope or is this not in scope, we would be unable to answer those questions. It's up to you to demonstrate that. If your question is more generally on our processes or maybe on the budgets and things, then you can contact us.
And the email address is applicants@ihi.europa.eu. We are going to put the address also on the chat. So
I would say for questions on that, your first port of call should probably be the webinars which were previously held, which go into quite some detail on that. And there's also questions and answers at the end of those. So hopefully your questions maybe have already been addressed there.
Okay, so we are still waiting for more questions from the audience. I think there was a great presentation by my colleague Colm. Again, I would, as Colm mentioned, I would refer also to the previous webinars and the recordings and presentations. And if you still have any questions, you can contact us, depending also, as Colm said, via this email, applicants@ihi.europa.eu. So I see that there's no more questions on the chat. We are then going to close the session. As Colm said, the next session is going to be at 11:30. It's going to be a pitching session. We look forward to having you there. Thank you very much for attending this session. Thank you very much, Colm. Sorry, we just got one last question. And can regulators be a partner in the application?
Yes, regulatory agencies are usually eligible for funding, and indeed, under IMI at least, they have been partners in several of our projects.
Okay, and there's a few questions about the presentation. So the recordings of the presentations are available on IHI website. We'll share the link on the chat. And we have another question about could the National Patient Organization about Parkinson's take part in the project, or would it be better for European General Patient Association to take part?
I mean, I think if you can bring something to a consortium addressing the needs of the call, there's nothing wrong with anybody joining a project. Obviously, we have a European scope, so you'd have to kind of demonstrate how you're doing that, but there's nothing wrong with a national patient organization doing that, so long as that European scope is borne in mind.
Can you share what was the success rate of the proposals for the last call?
I don't have that information off the top of my head. Okay, I'm told this is online, so if you check our website, you should be able to see that, and maybe we'll be able to put the link in the chat.
Great. So thank you everyone for your comments and for your questions. As I said, we look forward. We still keep getting questions on the chat, so I'm trying to address them as they come. So we do have another question on the: is it possible to create a diagnostic algorithm for a rare disease such as neuromyelitis optica with AI? I think it's a very specific.
I'm just going to refer you back to the answer I gave more generally at the start of the Q&A session, which is, you know, questions like this on scope or precise elements of scope. It's really up to you to demonstrate to the evaluators that what you're proposing is in the scope of the topic. So if you think you can put together a consortium that can credibly address the topic using this disease as an example, then that's fine, but it's up to you to really demonstrate that yourself.
Great. Thank you very much, Colm. So we'll just close the session now. Just follow the links also that my colleague Catherine posted on the chat. If you still have any questions, please let us know. But since there's no more, we're just closing the session now. Thank you very much for attending, and see you at the next session.
Thank you very much, and bye.